What food could win every American soldier's heart during the long years of World War II? This favorite meal gave tired troops warmth, steady strength, and a fleeting taste of home amid mud and gunfire. But what made one simple dish carry the weight of a nation's hope? Spam rations carried a reputation that outlasted the war itself. A small metal can holding salty pink meat that could feed a soldier on the move without a stove or fridge. Packed with pork shoulder and ham, it stayed good through any climate, which meant it traveled from Pacific Islands to frozen European trenches without complaint. Soldiers sliced it cold, fried it in a mess kit, or mixed it with powdered potatoes, and every bite delivered steady calories when supplies ran thin. Letters home often mentioned the same taste day after day, yet many men admitted that the familiar flavor gave a strange comfort in the chaos. Spam was easy to store, quick to open, and sturdy enough to survive rough transport, making it a quiet hero in the ration lineup. Back home, families learned to cook with it too, so the brand became a household name long after victory was declared. For many veterans, the pop of that metal key will always sound like the front lines and the promise of survival. Victory Garden. Stews kept soldiers and civilians connected to the farms they had left behind by turning humble vegetables into meals that stretched beyond their modest ingredients. While soldiers rarely had time to tend gardens, the produce from home gardens often ended up in their bowls through military supply lines. Carrots, potatoes, onions, and any seasonal greens were simmered in simple broth until tender, creating a dish that tasted like home even when served in a tin mess cup. These stews symbolized the effort of families back home who grew extra food to send to the troops, proving that victory could be cultivated one backyard at a time. The flavor changed with every batch, depending on which crops were thriving, but the warmth and nourishment remained constant. Soldiers remembered the earthy aroma as a reminder of family kitchens and quiet fields. Every spoonful offered a small escape from the sounds of war and a connection to the loved ones planting and harvesting far across the ocean. Corned beef. Hash became a dependable favorite because it turned preserved beef and potatoes into something that felt almost like a home-cooked meal. The meat arrived in cans, heavily salted and ready for a quick chop, while potatoes and onions were diced and fried until golden. When mixed together in a hot skillet, the ingredients formed a crispy crust that soldiers craved after long marches or cold nights. Its rich aroma cut through the damp smells of barracks and battlefields, offering comfort beyond its simple makeup. This dish filled stomachs with steady protein and carbohydrates that kept energy high during missions. Mess hall cooks could prepare huge pans at once, feeding entire units without complicated equipment. Many soldiers carried the memory of that hearty hash long after they returned, and it found a place in American diners where veterans sought familiar flavors. Corned beef hash proved that with a little heat and patience, even the plainest rations could become something worth remembering. Powdered egg scramble brought the taste of breakfast to foxholes and field camps where fresh eggs were impossible to find. Dehydrated eggs were whisked with water until they resembled the real thing, then poured into sizzling pans for a quick, protein-rich meal. Soldiers often added bits of canned meat or dried herbs to give the dish more character, but even plain it smelled like morning at home. The texture was not perfect, sometimes a little grainy, yet the familiar golden color lifted spirits before a long march. Easy to pack and lightweight, powdered eggs were shipped across oceans and stored for months without spoiling, making them a practical solution for feeding large numbers of troops. Many men joked about the rubber eggs, but few turned them down when the cold set in. For soldiers who had grown up on hearty farmhouse breakfasts, this scramble was a small but important reminder of normal life, a comfort that could fit in a simple metal cup. K-ration biscuits were the crunchy lifeline tucked inside every small khaki box that soldiers carried on patrol. These dense crackers were baked hard to last for months, providing a quick burst of carbohydrates without the need for cooking. Soldiers munched them dry, spread them with peanut butter, or crumbled them into soups to add body. Though plain in flavor, their durability and compact size made them perfect for long marches when every ounce of gear mattered. They held up through tropical humidity and bitter cold, never losing their crispness. Some men joked they could break a tooth, while others swore they were the best part of the ration kit because they stayed edible when other items spoiled. In the chaos of combat, a biscuit that never failed became a quiet reassurance. Back home, the same recipe inspired civilian crackers and snack breads, proof that even the simplest field food could leave a lasting mark on American kitchens. Navy bean soup offered slow-cooked comfort on ships and in base camps, where long shifts and cold nights demanded hearty sustenance. Dry Navy beans were soaked, simmered with onions, carrots, and sometimes bits of salt pork until they turned creamy and tender. The smell of the simmering pot spread through ship galleys and field kitchens, lifting morale as the hours passed. Sailors and soldiers alike welcomed the rich, smoky flavor and the warmth that lingered long after the bowl was empty. Beans provided crucial protein and fiber, making the soup as nourishing as it was filling. Cooks could stretch a small ration into a meal for dozens, an essential skill when supply lines were uncertain. The humble ingredients meant it could be prepared almost anywhere with little more than water and a flame. For many veterans, the memory of Navy bean soup carries the echo of ocean waves and late-night conversations in mess halls, where camaraderie was as important as calories. Peanut butter sandwiches were the easiest taste of home a soldier could find, needing nothing more than bread and a sturdy spread that never spoiled. Jars of peanut butter were shipped in bulk because the high protein content and long shelf life made them invaluable in the field. Soldiers slathered it on K-ration biscuits or any bread they could find, sometimes adding a drizzle of honey or a slice of dried fruit for variety. The rich, nutty flavor provided energy for long patrols and a quick comfort when the day turned harsh. For many, it recalled childhood lunches and calm kitchen tables far from the sound of artillery. It required no cooking, no fire, and no cleanup, which made it a perfect companion on marches or during quiet nights in the barracks. Peanut butter sandwiches proved that even in a global conflict, a simple, familiar food could bridge the gap between battlefield and home front with each satisfying bite. Army-issue coffee fueled early mornings and midnight watches with a strong, often bitter kick that soldiers came to rely on. The grounds were packed into small tins or instant packets that could be stirred into hot water, producing a brew that might be rough on the palate but steady on the nerves. In freezing weather or before a dangerous mission, that steaming cup provided both warmth and a jolt of alertness. The smell alone could draw weary troops to the mess tent, a shared ritual that fostered camaraderie even when words were few. Caffeine helped keep soldiers awake during long nights of guard duty or endless marches, making coffee as critical as any piece of gear. Many veterans later said that no cafe ever matched the taste of those gritty wartime cups because it was the context, not the quality, that mattered. A tin of Army coffee was more than a drink. It was reassurance that the fight would continue and that morning would come. Oatmeal with brown sugar gave soldiers a rare chance at a warm, sweet start to the day when rations allowed. Quick-cooking oats were easy to ship and stored well, ready to be boiled in a mess kit over a small flame. A sprinkle of brown sugar or a drizzle of molasses turned the plain porridge into something that tasted almost like home. The hot cereal provided steady energy for long marches and kept soldiers full when other supplies were low. Many men remembered waking to the smell of oats thickening in big field pots, the scent blending with damp earth and morning fog. It was simple, nourishing, and easy to prepare even under difficult conditions. A bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar was more than food. It was a moment of calm before the day's chaos, a reminder that comfort could be found in the smallest routines even in the middle of a war that seemed endless. Victory bread represented the spirit of conservation, using alternative grains like rye, barley, and oat flour to save wheat for the front lines. Bakers blended these grains with a little white flour to create loaves that stayed moist and hearty while stretching scarce resources. Soldiers tasted this bread both at home on leave and in base kitchens overseas, where it stood as a quiet symbol of shared sacrifice. The slightly darker crumb and nutty flavor became familiar to millions of Americans who understood that every slice helped feed the fight. Families back home baked the same recipe, connecting kitchen tables to the distant front through each crusty loaf. Victory bread reminded everyone that winning the war required small acts of adaptation from soldiers and civilians alike. Even after the war ended, some bakeries kept the recipe alive as a tribute to resilience. A piece of this bread was more than a meal. It was a sign that determination and ingenuity could nourish a nation in its hardest hour. Chocolate D-bars were dense, high-calorie chocolate rations carefully engineered to survive scorching climates and keep soldiers moving when nothing else could. Unlike a regular candy bar, these blocks were deliberately less sweet so that men would eat them for fuel rather than sheer pleasure, though many still considered them a rare treat. Each bar packed enough energy to sustain a soldier through long marches or sudden combat, and the faint cocoa aroma offered a hint of home even in the middle of a battlefield. Wrapped in tough foil to withstand jungle humidity or desert heat, the bar remained intact after weeks of transport. Soldiers often nibbled them slowly, savoring every bite while leaning against a foxhole wall or crouched in a cold tent. The simple act of unwrapping the thick chocolate was a small ritual of comfort and endurance. For many veterans, the memory of that bittersweet flavor lingers as a reminder of both the hardships and the brief moments of sweetness that defined their wartime days. Vienna. Sausages became a salty comfort tucked inside tiny cans that fit easily into a pack or jacket pocket. These miniature sausages were soft, smoky, and ready to eat straight from the can, which made them perfect for soldiers who lacked time or tools for cooking. The brine kept them moist and flavorful even after months in storage, and a quick warm-up over a small flame turned them into something close to a homemade meal. Troops enjoyed them with hardtack crackers or sliced into simple stews, creating a hearty snack that chased away hunger on long nights. Their familiar flavor reminded many soldiers of casual suppers back home, a quiet luxury when every other meal tasted like rations. The tiny pop of the tin's lid and the savory scent inside offered an immediate lift in morale. Years after the war, veterans still reached for those cans in grocery stores, proof that a humble sausage can carry the power of memory and survival. Macaroni and cheese loaf combined comfort and practicality by baking creamy pasta into a sliceable block that traveled well and stayed tasty even after hours on the march. Elbow macaroni was cooked, mixed with a sharp cheese sauce, and baked until firm enough to cut into neat slices that held their shape. Soldiers could carry a chunk in wax paper, eat it cold, or warm it in a pan when time allowed. The rich cheese and tender pasta delivered a satisfying bite that broke the monotony of plain field rations. Mess hall cooks often used powdered cheese and shelf-stable milk, making the dish easy to prepare in bulk without fresh dairy. For many soldiers, it tasted like a condensed version of the casseroles they had known from family dinners, a reminder that home cooking could be adapted to wartime needs. The loaf's golden edges and creamy center became a symbol of resourcefulness and comfort, proof that a beloved dish could survive even the strictest rationing. Potato pancakes offered a quick, hearty option that required only basic ingredients and whatever fat a camp kitchen could spare. Grated potatoes were mixed with a pinch of salt and perhaps an onion, then fried in sizzling lard or leftover bacon grease until crisp at the edges and tender inside. The smell of frying potatoes drifted through chilly encampments, drawing hungry soldiers eager for something hot and filling. These pancakes were endlessly adaptable. Cooks added scraps of ham, bits of cabbage, or dried herbs when available, turning them into a full meal with little effort. They cooked fast, which made them ideal for breakfast before a long march or for late-night hunger after guard duty. The combination of crisp crust and soft interior offered a satisfying contrast that lifted morale even on the toughest days. For soldiers used to canned meat and dry crackers, a freshly fried potato pancake tasted like a luxury, a small golden circle of warmth in a world that often felt cold and uncertain. Apple brown. Betty brought the warm scent of cinnamon and baked fruit into field kitchens where soldiers rarely expected dessert. Layers of sliced apples were sprinkled with sugar and spices, then topped with buttered crumbs that browned into a sweet crust as the dish baked. Mess hall cooks loved it because it used ingredients that traveled well and required no delicate handling. Soldiers loved it because every bite carried the taste of home kitchens and family suppers, a brief reminder of autumn evenings and quiet Sundays. The bubbling fruit filled the air with a fragrance that softened the edges of military life and made barracks feel almost domestic for a moment. Served warm when possible, it was equally good at room temperature, so men could carry leftovers on long patrols. Apple Brown Betty became more than a dessert. It was a promise of comfort and normalcy, proving that even in war, a simple baked apple dish could lift spirits and satisfy a deep longing for home. Split pea soup with ham bits provided a thick, nourishing bowl of protein that stayed hot long enough to warm both hands and heart. Dried split peas simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and small chunks of cured ham until the peas softened into a creamy texture. The smoky flavor of the ham infused every spoonful, making the soup taste far richer than its modest ingredients suggested. Large cauldrons bubbled in base kitchens, feeding entire units with minimal cost and maximum comfort. Soldiers returning from icy night patrols often found relief in the rising steam and savory aroma, a sign that a hot meal was waiting. The soup stored well and tasted even better the next day, making it perfect for unpredictable schedules and long deployments. For many soldiers, the memory of that simple green bowl endures as the essence of wartime hospitality, a dish that proved resilience and warmth could be served together even in the harshest environments. Hardtack crackers were the indestructible backbone of many field meals, a biscuit so tough it could survive months in a pack without going stale. Made from flour, water, and salt, these plain squares were baked until rock hard, earning a reputation for durability that sometimes exceeded their flavor. Soldiers softened them in coffee, crumbled them into stews, or simply gnawed them slowly during long marches. Though bland, they provided reliable calories when everything else spoiled or ran out. Some joked that a cracker could double as a hammer or a weapon, a bit of humor that made the dry crunch easier to bear. Hardtack linked soldiers to earlier generations of fighters who had survived on the same recipe, adding a sense of shared history to each bite. Its endurance made it both a joke and a blessing, the one food a soldier could always count on to be there, unyielding, no matter how long the battle lasted. Cabbage and potato hash turned humble staples into a filling skillet meal that stretched rations and filled bellies. Chopped cabbage and diced potatoes were fried with bits of salt pork or leftover bacon grease until the vegetables softened and caramelized. The sizzling sound and savory aroma spread through makeshift kitchens, promising warmth and comfort after grueling days. Cheap, plentiful, and easy to cook in large batches, this dish became a dependable answer to the constant hunger of wartime life. Soldiers appreciated how the crisped potatoes added texture while the cabbage offered sweetness and vital nutrients. Mess cooks liked how easily they could scale the recipe to feed a whole unit with whatever scraps were available. It was the kind of simple meal that demanded little yet gave much, a reminder that even the most basic ingredients could create something satisfying. In the cold and uncertainty of war, a plate of cabbage and potato hash tasted like a small victory all its own. Molasses cookies arrived in care packages from home, each one a soft and spiced reminder that someone was thinking of the soldier far away. Wives, mothers, and neighbors baked them by the dozen, packing them carefully so they would survive the long journey overseas. The rich sweetness of molasses mingled with ginger and cinnamon, filling barracks with the scent of familiar kitchens as soon as a box was opened. Soldiers shared them with friends or saved them for quiet moments, letting each bite carry a memory of loved ones. These cookies were more than a treat. They were a message of love and steadfastness, proof that even across oceans, families could reach their sons and brothers. The simple ingredients held up well during shipping, making them a practical gift as well as an emotional one. For many veterans, the taste of molasses cookies forever linked the harsh reality of war with the unbreakable comfort of home, a flavor that lingered long after the battles ended. Fried bologna sandwiches brought an affordable protein punch to wartime lunches when fresh meat was scarce. Thin slices of bologna were quickly fried in a skillet until the edges curled and browned, releasing a smoky aroma that filled the camp. Served on soft bread with mustard or a swipe of butter, The sandwich offered a warm, savory meal with minimal effort. Soldiers appreciated how quickly it came together, especially on cold mornings when time and ingredients were limited. The frying process gave the meat a crispy edge and a richer taste than the plain cold cuts many were used to, making it a surprising favorite among field cooks and hungry troops. Easy to transport and even easier to cook, fried bologna sandwiches became a quiet staple that carried through the war years and into post-war kitchens back home. The memory of that sizzling slice still evokes the blend of thrift, ingenuity, and simple pleasure that defined so many meals during the conflict. Stuffed bell peppers brought the comfort of a home-cooked dinner into army camps where ingredients were scarce and creativity was essential. Cooks filled green or red peppers with a mixture of ground beef, cooked rice, and onions, binding it all with a light tomato sauce that kept everything moist during baking. The peppers softened as they roasted, releasing a sweet aroma that mingled with the savory filling and filled mess halls with a welcome scent of normal family meals. Because peppers and rice were easier to find than large cuts of meat, the dish stretched rations without feeling skimpy. Soldiers loved how each pepper was its own neat package, easy to serve and satisfying after long drills. When fresh vegetables were available near the front, this recipe became a prized addition to the daily menu. Eating one felt like sitting at a kitchen table far from the battlefield, a brief escape wrapped in a tender pepper shell that gave every bite a hint of home and hope. Homemade apple butter traveled from family kitchens to distant foxholes as a sweet spread that turned hard military bread into a small luxury. Apples were slow cooked with cinnamon, cloves, and just enough sugar until they became a dark, smooth preserve with a fragrance that spoke of autumn orchards. Families back home filled glass jars or tin cans, sealing them carefully so they could survive the long journey across oceans. Soldiers would open a jar and instantly smell the comforting spice of home, a scent that cut through the damp air of tents and barracks. A spoonful spread over dry crackers or coarse army bread transformed a plain ration into something special. Apple butter needed no refrigeration and stayed fresh for months, making it ideal for care packages that carried love as much as food. Every bite reminded soldiers that someone far away had taken the time to cook slowly, stirring a pot until the fruit turned to velvet, sending both flavor and affection across the sea. Victory pancakes offered soldiers a rare taste of breakfast normalcy even when supplies were tight and fresh eggs were impossible to find. Field cooks whisked together powdered milk, egg substitutes, and rationed flour to create a light batter that sizzled when poured onto a hot griddle. The smell of cooking pancakes instantly lifted spirits, bringing to mind lazy Sunday mornings and family kitchens back home. Soldiers would line up eagerly, tin plates in hand, waiting for a stack drizzled with whatever sweetener was available, sometimes cane syrup, sometimes a drizzle of molasses. Despite the substitutions, the pancakes puffed up golden and soft, proving that comfort could be created even under wartime restrictions. Sharing them became an event, a pause in the relentless pace of drills and duties. For a brief moment, the world felt familiar again as soldiers sat with warm pancakes and strong coffee, savoring a meal that tasted like peace. Victory pancakes became a cherished reminder that even in war, small joys could still rise and shine. Baked beans with salt pork carried a deep, smoky sweetness that filled army canteens with a smell that lingered long after the pots were empty. Dried navy beans simmered slowly with pieces of salted pork, molasses, and onions until the beans grew tender and the sauce thickened to a rich, dark glaze. This New England classic traveled easily to military kitchens because beans were inexpensive and kept well, while salt pork added much-needed protein and flavor. Soldiers welcomed the hearty warmth after cold marches or damp nights, ladling generous portions over slices of coarse bread. The dish could be cooked in massive batches, making it perfect for feeding entire companies without strain on supplies. Every spoonful delivered a balance of savory and sweet that felt both filling and familiar. For many, the aroma of baked beans bubbling in a heavy pot became a sensory link to home and family gatherings, turning a simple wartime meal into a source of deep comfort and steady strength. Pickled beets brought a burst of color and tang to otherwise plain army rations, their jewel-red slices brightening every metal plate. Beets were boiled until tender, sliced thin and packed in jars with vinegar, sugar, and warm spices like clove and allspice. The result was a vegetable that stayed crisp and flavorful for months without refrigeration, making it perfect for long deployments or transport across oceans. Soldiers appreciated the sharp, sweet taste that cut through the monotony of canned meat and dry bread. The vivid color also cheered up bleak mess tables, a small visual reminder of fresh gardens back home. Care packages often included jars of pickled beets prepared by mothers and grandmothers who knew their bright flavor would survive the trip. Opening a jar released a fragrant tang that lifted spirits as surely as the first bite woke tired taste buds. In an era when fresh produce was a rare treat, these beets stood as proof that a simple root could deliver both nourishment and joy. Cornmeal. Mush with syrup was a simple hot cereal that warmed soldiers from the inside out, providing steady energy for long days in the field. Coarse cornmeal was slowly whisked into boiling water until it thickened into a creamy porridge, then served in metal bowls or poured into pans to cool and slice. When available, cooks drizzled dark cane syrup or molasses over the top, creating a sweet contrast to the earthy corn flavor. This humble dish required few ingredients, all of which were inexpensive and easy to store, making it a reliable staple in both field kitchens and permanent barracks. Soldiers enjoyed it hot for breakfast, or cooled and fried as a hearty side at dinner. The warm scent of corn and syrup became a gentle reminder of country kitchens and quiet mornings at home. Even after the war, many veterans continued to cook cornmeal mush, proving that its straightforward comfort had earned a lasting place in American memories of sustenance and survival. Roast pork shoulder turned any rare delivery of fresh meat into a feast that fed entire units and revived weary spirits. Quartermasters prized pork shoulder for its rich flavor and forgiving texture, which stayed tender even after hours of slow roasting over open flames or in large camp ovens. Seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and maybe a touch of garlic, the meat basted itself as it cooked, filling the air with a savory aroma that drew soldiers from every corner of the encampment. When finely carved, each slice revealed juicy layers of meat and fat that melted on the tongue, a luxury compared to daily rations of canned goods. Mess crews served it with coarse bread or boiled potatoes, creating a meal that felt festive even amid war. The sound of knives hitting the carving board and the sight of steaming platters created a moment of camaraderie and celebration. For soldiers far from home, roast pork shoulder was a reminder that good food could still bring people together and lift morale. Carrot pineapple salad offered a sweet and tangy side that brightened plates when sugar was scarce and fresh fruit rare. Grated carrots were mixed with crushed pineapple, a splash of lemon juice, and a light dressing of rationed mayonnaise or plain yogurt if available. The natural sweetness of the carrots and fruit meant little added sugar was needed, while the bright colors made even the drabbest mess hall meal more appealing. This dish traveled well and could be prepared in advance, staying fresh and crisp for hours in the chill of a field kitchen. Soldiers appreciated the refreshing crunch and the hint of tropical flavor that pineapple brought to an otherwise ordinary menu. It reminded many of summertime picnics and family suppers, a cheerful break from the standard wartime fare. In an era defined by scarcity, carrot pineapple salad proved that a handful of humble ingredients could still create a dish that felt celebratory and nourishing, keeping morale high with every cool, bright bite. Campfire. Chili delivered smoky heat and hearty comfort to soldiers gathered around flickering flames after long marches. Ground beef, onions, and garlic were browned in large cast-iron pots before beans, tomatoes, and chili powder were added to simmer slowly over open fires. The bubbling stew released a spicy aroma that cut through the evening chill and drew troops closer to the pot, where they waited with tin bowls ready. Chili was easy to adapt to whatever ingredients were available, from extra beans to bits of sausage or dried peppers, making it a practical yet flavorful choice for unpredictable wartime supplies. Served with coarse bread or overboiled rice, it provided both protein and warmth that revived tired bodies. Soldiers traded stories as they ate, the shared meal strengthening bonds as surely as it filled stomachs. The lingering heat of each spoonful was a welcome reminder of hearth and home, proving that even in rugged conditions, a pot of chili could bring real comfort and camaraderie. Homemade fruitcake became the ultimate care package treat, a dense loaf packed with dried fruit, nuts, and enough sweetness to last the long journey overseas. Families baked these heavy cakes weeks in advance, soaking them in rum or brandy when possible to preserve them for months. Wrapped carefully in wax paper and tins, they traveled across oceans and battle lines to reach soldiers craving a taste of home. The rich aroma of spice and fruit greeted each soldier as soon as the package was opened, filling tents and barracks with memories of holiday gatherings. Each slice was a small celebration, a reminder that loved ones were thinking of them even from thousands of miles away. Because fruitcakes kept well without refrigeration, they remained moist and flavorful despite the long trip. Soldiers often shared them with their units, spreading both the dessert and the warmth of family connection. In the bleakness of war, homemade fruitcake was more than a sweet. It was a piece of home wrapped in brown paper. Sorghum syrup had 3 great uses during the war that the United States had actively participated in. It was something the government could rely on both for the people of America and the country's soldiers. So it became a key player just off of that alone. Secondly, most areas already had a knack for sorghum, and it was the more affordable option for a lot of different regions. This was thanks to most places producing their own sorghum, and that's why the disruption in the global supply chain hadn't really affected sorghum production too badly. That's a factor that lots of people don't talk about enough, but supplies for the entire world had become low everywhere by this point. Sorghum was a great alternative to sugar, molasses, and malts, and it helped to keep some of this in store as well. Sorghum also had a bit of magnesium, but it was a really good source of iron. It was also a wonderful sweetener, and this was actually a part of an overall bigger movement. For the first time in a while, the mainstream masses were delving into the culture that was out there in America. Sorghum syrup was a niche part of American syrups, for example, but in folk traditions, it's always been wildly popular. The war was just the first time the general public explored those traditions. Smoked picnic ham with brown sugar was another really inexpensive way to stretch ingredients without breaking the bank. You might not know, but refined sugar actually pretty much became a myth in homes back then. In more bougie neighborhoods, sure, you'd pop open a cabinet and see some sitting pretty, but for everyone else, that just wasn't the case. Refined sugar was a rarity and also an expensive ingredient to buy. Brown sugar, on the other hand, was the perfect fix. Cheap, available easily, and barely distinguishable, it was the backbone of a lot of wartime cooking. Also, the smoked picnic ham isn't really authentic either, at least not in the way you're thinking. Ham usually is made from the hind leg, but picnic ham is cured, and it's cut out of the shoulder. It's got mostly the same texture, but it's a bit on the cheaper side because it's tougher and has a higher fat percentage, which wasn't really a bad thing. I mean, the people were definitely lacking some of that in their diet. Smoked picnic hams with brown sugar were most regularly made around things like Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was a nifty little way to make everyone feel like they were celebrating. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. So, for onions stuffed with grape nuts, you needed nothing that fancy, not even a lot of seasoning outside of your basic salt and pepper. All you needed was 1.5 cups of pork sausage meat, some melted fat, ketchup, and if you could spare some strips, then bacon. Of course, the key player, grape nuts, would come later when the onions would be chopped and diced mixed with the sausage and the other ingredients. This was then baked for around 40 minutes, and the outcome was a resounding yes from everyone at the dinner table. Dishes that were simple but incredibly effective at filling everyone and leaving them with a happy smile were the holy grail of the 40s and 50s. Dried peas may be the wallflowers of the legume world, but they were the unsung heroes of many kitchens during the Great Depression. These little green powerhouses were tiny, nutrient-packed, and incredibly cheap, just the kind of food that families could stretch their food budgets as far as possible. In particular, split peas shone brightly as the star ingredient in hearty soups and stews. A handful of vegetables, maybe a scrap of salt pork, simmered with a pot of water made a meal that could warm bellies and spirits. The peas themselves were a solid dose of protein for those who couldn't afford meat and helped families stay nourished when times were tough. A near-infinite shelf life also came from dried peas. They could be stored in jars or cloth sacks and could last for years, making them a reliable choice for households that wanted to prepare for lean months. Peas were often grown by rural families, which dried and preserved them for the winter, or city dwellers went to market stalls to get their supply. Dried peas have been overshadowed by the flashier ingredient, but their legacy remains. They remind us that sometimes the simplest foods are the most dependable, feeding families through economic storms with a few handfuls of green perseverance. If you're a fan of pineapple on pizza, you would have loved this next one. Pineapple and cheese salad was a unique delight back in the day. This dish came into existence when someone decided to mix pineapple and cheese together in times of misery. Imagine cubes of pineapple in a creamy cheese mixture, terrifying or finger-licking delicious? There's no in-between. This was a variation of the infamous candle salad, which was a vintage fruit salad popular in America in the 1920s and was typically composed of lettuce, pineapple, banana, cherry, and either mayonnaise or cottage cheese. This was considered a luxurious delicacy during the tough times of the war, but just fails to meet the standards now. It's still a great way to use up leftover pineapple from your holiday punch if you're ever feeling adventurous. So, we've gone over the greens people eat during times like this, as well as what they substitute in the place of regular food they no longer had access to. What about the most important part of American eating? Well, naturally, you can't have a United States without protein. Canned minced meat was the general solution everybody came up with in the face of the food shortage that everybody was facing. Protein simply became a non-factor in most people's day because the best, really good, and even slightly above average cuts of meat were always rationed away by the government for the use of soldiers. That left people to start eating things like necks, feet, tongues, and other parts of animals they hadn't ever used. Things like offal eating really became popular, and one thing that really helped alleviate the shortage was canned minced meat. Canned minced meat wasn't usually pre-seasoned, though some variants did come with a lot of generous seasoning, which made it easier to keep down too. However, they were also just a bit more expensive, and people were trying their best to keep costs down on the low. Plus, loads of people had already kept a store of basic seasonings and herbs to use for situations like this. Being cost-effective was a routine for the American public by that point. Potato cakes were pretty much the go-to option for almost everyone during the war period. You have to keep in mind that the country was still juggling the effects of the Great Depression too. Both of them in tandem really made it hard for people to get much else. As good as potatoes can be, especially when you serve them up in cake form, it can get a little stale. When you eat it as much as they did, it gets pretty hard to be excited for it. One way to really spice them up was to pair your potato cakes with fried onions. Sounds simple, but that's pretty much what sums up wartime cooking. Simple, efficient little tricks that make a world of difference. Potatoes were already a wartime staple. They were the easiest crop to grow around, and both rural farmers and government bigwigs took notice of that. This was a simple and amazing way to get some easy comfort and keep bellies full. Also, another thing that made these really easy was how much people traded potatoes and onions. It was really common to barter with vegetables. That meant that the recipe got around. It was in community cookbooks too, so there was no shortage of positive PR for it. I guess you could say it's pretty deserved, wouldn't you say? People that grew up during World War II will know that mixing sawdust with bread to fortify it so that your supply would last twice as long is not quite the urban myth it is made out to be today, but rather a sad fact of a dark time that people would prefer to leave in the past. This was something born purely out of necessity and a lack of basic necessities like flour. Since it was becoming so scarce across America, people's supplies of bread were running out fast and often. Bread was the only thing families had to eat too. With even that comfort gone, people took to mixing sawdust, which you could even taste in the bread. In some cases, it made the bread go bad faster, such as people when used too much of it, But in most other appliances of this technique, it worked as a filler when nothing else could be used as one. This would also set up a trend of consuming fiber in the 70s, even though most companies used cellulose fiber that was made from sawdust. So it actually does have quite a history in America. During the Great Depression, canned tomatoes were the unsung heroes, adding a splash of color and flavor to a drab dinner table. These little cans of sunshine were lifesavers, turning even the blandest of meals into something you could eat. Canned tomatoes were the Depression-era kitchen's MVP, the versatile ingredient that could be used in soups and stews, sauces and casseroles. Cheap, easy to store, and full of enough acid and flavor to perk up just about anything, including your spirits, they were. There was more to tomatoes than taste. They were nutritional powerhouses. They were high in vitamin C and helped keep scurvy at bay when fresh fruits were unavailable. And, because they had a long shelf life, families could stockpile them without fear of spoilage. Families also canned tomatoes from their gardens to last them through the winter. Rows of gleaming mason jars in a cellar, each holding the promise of a warm, flavorful meal when times got tough, wasn't unusual. Canned tomatoes are still pantry staples today, but we might forget how simple they are. They weren't just a convenience back in the Depression, they were a lifeline. And sometimes the smallest luxuries can be the biggest. Canned ham was like the instant ramen of foods back in the post-war days. In 1940, it started gaining traction as the miracle meat during World War II. It was also transported as an aid to Great Britain and the Soviet Union. Canned ham was nothing fancy, which was the best thing about this meal. It was perfect for busy households or people on the run. Plus, its long shelf life was like the cherry on top. Back in the day, this was a convenience food dream come true. No fuss, no muss, just a whole lot of ham. But let's be real. Fresh ham is where it's at. Unless you're stranded on a desert island, I'd stick to the deli counter. We don't need to punish ourselves with canned meat anymore, which is why this dinner has become a part of ancient history. So, here's a ration that was actually heavily politically charged as well. What do you think happens when you introduce canned sauerkraut, a heavily German meal, in a time when anti-German sentiment is soaring sky high in the hearts and minds of the people? Some think this was a deliberate attempt by the American government to sway public opinion towards the takes they wanted. Sort of a try at radicalizing them by reminding them who was responsible for their current state. To promote American unity, the government even tried to get people to start calling sauerkraut something entirely different. Now, it was to be known as Liberty cabbage, and this was a way for them to take the parts of German culture that they liked while distancing people overall from the image of it that already existed. This was a European, German meal, and that wasn't what they wanted it to look like because it was also a fantastic ration. Hence, you saw the term Liberty cabbage being plastered all over newspapers and ads, as well as packaging. Canned liver spreads were a part of the several different kinds of processed foods that those same industries I'm talking about started whipping up to help with the relief efforts. There was a massive need for food that was nutritionally sound and also really convenient. Some people think that the over-reliance on convenient food that was a last-ditch Band-Aid fix instead of actual proper channels of distribution for food that dealt with the shortages is what led to Americans and their whole deal with convenience food culture. Wartime rationing was badly handled, and that's just a historical fact. Canned foods made life easier for both soldiers and civilians in general. They were the kind of stuff that would last you months and would also be a good source of much-needed protein. People started to eat different kinds of animal meat that they never had thought of eating before, and canned liver was a part of this. While liver itself was common in some traditions and cultures, such as Native American cultures, Middle Eastern communities, and indigenous tribes across America, it had never hit the suburbs like it did during this time. Canned liver spreads meant that your average breakfast consisting of homemade stale bread, crackers, and toast also was just a bit more exciting than usual. A pretty imaginative way of getting some familiar old flavors back into the weekly diet was mock food, specifically mock fish fillets. We're going to take a look this time at both this recipe and how exactly things like it became common. See, there's one thing about people from back then. While they definitely had it horrible, their circumstances really expanded their horizons in the kitchen. Mock culture was all about mimicking flavors of classic dishes with inexpensive ingredients. Stuff that was easy to get, wouldn't cut too deep into your pockets, and would also last you a good while. Mock fish fillets were actually made out of mashed potatoes. I really wasn't kidding when I said people really grew a newfound appreciation for potatoes. Recipes in cookbooks back then were using them in ways that the curly fries and hash brown-addled brains of you and I could only dream of. Still, there were times when even potatoes weren't available. In that case, they'd make use of bread. Now, you might naturally be wondering how bread even comes close to imitating the flavor of a fish fillet. Well, apparently, soaking it in some milk and mixing it with powdered eggs and flour actually forms a mixture that gets the texture down. Next, your spices: onion, parsley, pepper, and some pretty basic stuff, which was still easy enough to get. Though even those were stretched thin, spice cabinets would often run empty. Do you think this actually does the job? If you try it, share what you thought in the comments below. Kraut juice. It's just what it sounds like. During the Great Depression, fermented cabbage brine was a go-to pantry item, prized for its versatility and surprising nutritional benefits. It was a byproduct of sauerkraut making, and wasting it was out of the question. Straight down the throat for its purported health benefits as a cooking liquid for soups and stews, or even as a splash to bland foods to add flavor. Basically, it was the Depression-era version of an electrolyte drink, thought to help digestion and keep people going when fresh produce was scarce. But the taste was divisive. You either loved it or learned to tolerate it. Kraut juice had its good points too. It was cheap, it kept forever, and it was surprisingly rich in vitamins and probiotics. It was a lifeline in a jar for families with limited resources. Kraut juice has faded from the household staple, but it hasn't gone away altogether. Some old-school recipes still use it, and occasionally it's sipped as a health tonic. For the people who lived through the Great Depression, kraut juice wasn't a health trend. It was a necessity. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, one briny sip at a time. Black pudding used to be one of the most precious desserts of America that people would chow down on every Sunday. And despite those simple joys being out of reach, people wanted to try their hand at recreating the taste and thrill of a black pudding with what was there on hand. Thus, we had mock black pudding. This typically involved porridge oats or oatmeal, with thyme as the primary seasoning. If you had butter, then even better, but margarine worked just fine to give it thickness. What you had was something that did not truly capture the taste of a good black pudding pie, but was still awfully delightful to eat. It makes sense why people would go back to the original when it became a reasonable idea, though. Vienna sausages were thin parboiled sausages traditionally made of pork and beef in a casing of sheep's intestine, then given a low-temperature smoking. These originated in Germany during the First World War and were traditionally made from cured pork. After having been brought to North America by European immigrants, Vienna sausage came to mean only smaller and much shorter smoked and canned wieners, rather than link sausage, beginning about 1903. During the post-war days, it became a famous finger food at parties and family gatherings. From hot dogs to casseroles, Vienna sausages can do it all. Just don't expect a gourmet experience. They're still available today, but they're nowhere as famous as they once were. I'm going to have to go back to talking about how much we've borrowed from our British friends over in the United Kingdom. Bubble and squeak is quintessential British food after all. It was pretty genius too. This shares a theme with the picnic casseroles we just discussed because both were phenomenal ways to repurpose your leftovers. A lot of these dishes were powerhouses made exclusively out of stuff that was either left behind or simply was about to go bad. The earliest mention of bubble and squeak is in the 1700s, and that's just a pretty bare-bones meat and cabbage dish. Over time, it was adapted to the current situation, and meatless versions were made popular. These ones just prioritized using potatoes and vegetables, basically anything high in fiber. The reason you'd want that is because it'd keep you full for longer, which was always a godsend during the war. The potatoes would work as a binding agent. The leftover vegetables were chopped and mixed in for nutrition, and if you got super lucky, Some corned beef or bacon would work really well for flavor. As far as the culture goes, Bubble and Squeak really emphasized the mentality of wasting absolutely nothing. Despite how humble the recipe is, it's definitely something that brought comfort to a lot of families. War or no war, who can say some mashed potatoes and greens haven't cheered them up at some point? During the Second World War, another hobby had been acquired by the mass public, and it was actually crucial at keeping them alive. Lots of people began foraging for dried mushrooms. See, it wasn't a hobby per se for people who were living in rural areas and on the outskirts of society. They had pretty much been very used to already foraging for things and also got ahead of the game when the trend first took over. People foraged for all kinds of reasons, but the chief one among everyone's list was always that it was free. It was the best thing to do and the best thing to look for during the war too, because mushrooms, more than anything else they were so good at doing, they could add an incredible amount of flavor to whatever it was you were making. This meant that people could enjoy meals once in a while too. I know you might have expected a practical reason like how they grew around the environment, the many nutritional benefits of mushrooms, or how long they last. But honestly, people were tired of always thinking about the pros and cons of something. Being logical is an effort, not a trait, you know? Takes energy. Energy was something people desperately lacked because they barely had any sources of joy in their day, and the fact that they could get morels, porcini, even shiitake mushrooms every once in a while definitely cheered them up during their day. Bubble and Squeak was something that completely fit the situations most people would find themselves in during the war, because this dish is all about the leftovers. Usually, Sunday dinner's leftovers would be used in a Bubble and Squeak to make sure nothing went to waste. Plus, people would definitely take that sentiment to heart when it came to holiday dinners where there were enough things left to constitute at least 2 or 3 meals the next day. Usually, this dish is made with potatoes and cabbage and is fried, so it goes properly and amazingly with some potato flotties or other items on the list. Maybe you can take a note from people's books the next time you think you have nothing to eat, but plenty of things still left. Pickled vegetables were the ultimate solution for long-term nourishment when fresh produce was a fleeting luxury. Families in the Great Depression knew how to make their gardens work overtime, and pickling was a go-to way to stretch the harvest into lean winter months. If it grew, it could be pickled. Cucumbers, green beans, cabbage, and even watermelon rinds were preserved in tangy brine. The process was simple but ingenious. Jars were packed with vegetables, vinegar, salt, and spices to become shelf-stable pantry stars. Preserving food with pickling didn't just preserve the food, it elevated it. Pickled vegetables gave sharp, zesty flavors to otherwise bland meals, bringing a taste of summer to the dead of winter. Pickling was more than a food preservation method. It was a communal activity. Neighbors swapped jars, families shared brine recipes, and pickling became a way to connect during hard times. Nothing was wasted. Even scraps that would have otherwise been discarded had a second life in the pickle jar. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Pickled vegetables are a trendy addition to charcuterie boards these days. But during the Depression, they were a necessity. But for families who were barely making ends meet, a pantry full of jars of pickled vegetables wasn't just a source of food, it was a source of pride and security. Spam and eggs was a classic during World War II when Spam was not only dirt cheap, but also readily available everywhere. Spam's reputation as one of the heartiest, affordable, and long-lasting meat products made it a perfect fit for the tough times. Plus, its delicious taste spoke for itself. I mean, imagine a salty, processed meat block nestled next to a sunny-side-up egg. It's a match made in, wartime necessity. It originated during the Great Depression era, but World War II is when it became a hit around the globe. Now, let's be honest, it's not exactly gourmet. Spam continued to be popular in the post-war era and became a staple in most American households. While Spam is still around today, it's no longer the breakfast star it once was. So, the hard part about this entire stretch of American history was the massive toll it took on basic necessities that people have always had growing up in their life. Ever remember a time when mineral white sugar wasn't a reasonable purchase for you? Exactly. See, this is the kind of stuff that really gets to people, and when that happens, people find substitutes. One of the most revolutionary ones people ever found was molasses, which could work in the place of sugar in just about any culinary context. You could substitute these when you were baking a pie, making a filling, or putting together a wonderful tart. That was what you would typically make in better days, though of course wartime cooking was rarely ever that extravagant. Still, thanks to how cheap molasses were, it was easy for people to stockpile them. This meant that people got to enjoy sweet desserts in times like these, times where they really needed them, when it really mattered. Split pea soup was always something that we enjoyed greatly, mostly thanks to our European neighbors in the States. They didn't become a nationwide sensation until the Depression and World War II hit, though. That entire period actually saw an insane spike in the general perception of beans, peas, and lentils. Basically, anything that was vaguely similar to that was suddenly God's greatest gift to Earth. This doesn't just have to do with the times being hard and there being a massive war going on either. It has to do, again, with some age-old state-backed peer pressure. A lot of people were lost in the face of rations and surpluses that just didn't make the cut or last very long. The tensions with the government were extraordinarily high, especially with a lot of people just being tired of the war effort. The government of the United States of America decided to encourage people to cultivate some new hobbies in these trying times. One of those happens to be foraging, and it was just as convenient as it sounds. Free food that you can gather right from nature itself, that no one has to pay for? You can definitely see why something like that went mainstream. Shortages were extremely common right up to before Pearl Harbor, and especially after it. This is what led to things like Woolton pie dominating the mainstream, even though the dish would probably not see the light of day in normal circumstances. It is just that things like pies, loaves, pizzas, etc. had all become unattainable desires that were out of the public's grasp, more or less. Something had to be done, though, because not only did people need to be fed, they needed to be reminded of why eating good food is one of life's best joys. A hot, nice meal can do so much for a person's soul in times of conflict and uncertainty. And Woolton pies, despite being made entirely out of vegetables, not only gave your body the health boost it needed, but they felt comforting to share with your family. Let's just forget about steak dinners. Canned fish was really the MVP during the Great Depression. Cheap and convenient protein for families on razor-thin budgets came in the form of sardines, salmon, and even mackerel, which found their way onto dinner tables across America. The ultimate grab-and-go meal was sardines packed in oil or water, straight from the can, smashed onto bread, or spread with a little mayo and a lot of hope they could be eaten. Canned salmon was a heartier option for casseroles, patties, and soups, stretching one can to feed an entire family. The salty, slightly fishy flavor wasn't for everyone, but when you were hungry, you didn't complain. There were other advantages to canned fish as well. It was shelf-stable, good for months without refrigeration, and small enough to transport. A favorite with travelers, hobos, and relief workers, it was a meal that even the most transient lives could count on. Canned fish is still around today, but it's not what it used to be. But in the 1930s, it was a lifesaver, showing that even the smallest catches could mean the biggest difference when times were tough. Meatloaf. Who doesn't love this classic comfort food? But what happens when you get a sweet craving and add a little twist to it? Well, you get meatloaf with brown sugar glaze. Meatloaf is a traditional German, Scandinavian, and Belgian dish, and it is a cousin to the meatball in Dutch cuisine. But a brown sugar glaze? That's where things got exciting. This dish was a culinary experiment of the WWII days, and it's safe to say it was a huge success. Every continent came up with their own variations of this dinner, and it became a centerpiece at every dinner table. It was basically combining ground meat, breadcrumbs, and spices, topped with a caramelized brown sugar and ketchup glaze. What could go wrong with that? Meatloaf is still a staple for most people around the world, but you don't really see it get paired with a brown sugar glaze anymore. It was just a post-war craving, I guess. You could say the same for lots of things that were made popular during the war, for example, dried noodles. This was a staple that worked really well in many different places, thanks to the really long lifespan of dried noodles. They're also just as easy to store as bouillon cubes and pretty cost-efficient if you think about it. All it took to gather the ingredients to make stuff like this from scratch was a few cents. It helped people restore a sense of normalcy if you ask lots of food analysts and historians. People always were used to eating spaghetti and meatballs, noodles and pastas, dishes like that since they were teenagers. It helped people relive some of the days they were used to before the constant war efforts took over the scope of their everyday lives. Plus, people often used bouillon cubes along with their dried noodles. It was things like that, which when people put together one by one, eventually started to look like something resembling a real plate of food, and that meant a lot at the time. Tell us which soldier favorite you'd try first, then like and subscribe to keep this wartime flavor march going.